Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Flourish FM, podcast for the good life. Today's interviewee is Dr. Caroline Leaf. Caroline is a clinical and research neuroscientist, communication pathologist, and author recognized for her groundbreaking work on brain science and mental health. She has a Ph.D. in communication pathology, and she focuses on the mind-brain connection and the transformative power of thought management for enhancing mental well-being. Our mission is to make mental health care, knowledge about the power of our minds, and tools for improving learning and memory affordable, accessible, and applicable to everyone, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, age, sexual orientation, or religion. She is the author of several best-selling books, including Switch on Your Brain, The Key to Peak Happiness, Thinking and Health, and her most recent book, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, 5 Simple, Scientifically Proven Steps to Reduce Anxiety, Stress, and Toxic Thinking, offers practical strategies for overcoming mental clutter and enhancing emotional well-being. And that is the focus of our conversation with Caroline today. Nick, what did you enjoy most about our conversation with Caroline?
I think in a way, I really haven't heard anyone else do it. She seems to take so many different, what she called techniques or tools or approaches, and she very clearly, and I thought at least practically, creates this vessel, right, or this system that she calls neurocycling to make it easier for us to do those things. And that might sound like really kind of basic, right, when you first hear it. But what that really means is if you can do this process, right, this evidence-backed process, and you can get it to a point where it's automatic, you're doing it almost without thinking, then you can really set yourself up, I think, to navigate unpleasantness in a very different way, whether that's boredom or anger or frustration, or we talked a lot about trauma, depression, and those sorts of things. So I just found it to be a real synthesis and sort of creative reorganization, right, and development of something that helps move all these other kind of fragmented tools forward. So I just really appreciated that perspective. And I think anyone looking to navigate life in general, but certainly unpleasantness, and I'm thinking about athletes, high performers, whoever it might be, but it's really just anyone living life, as she says, they really benefit from this sort of framework that she presents.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Okay, so we hope you love this conversation. This is How to Clean Up Your Mental Mess and Flourish with Dr. Caroline Leaf. All right, Caroline, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm doing so well. Thank you so much. Love the London accent.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today amidst your hectic schedule of interviews. And we're excited to dive in to your huge amount of work, particularly your most recent book, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. And that book puts forward 5 scientifically proven steps to reduce anxiety, stress, and toxic thinking, which you describe as the solution to cleaning up our mental mess. So can we please start off by getting clear on what exactly our mental mess is? And can you please describe these 5 steps?
Absolutely. I love it. Diving straight to the core of the issue. Basically, our mental, I have to answer that by just quickly defining the difference between the mind and the brain, because when we talk about mental, we're talking about mind stuff, which I think everyone gets. But it's very easy for people in our current sort of day and age of how science presents mind and brain to think that mind and brain are the same thing. And that is actually a very modern idea, to think of mind and brain as the same thing. But scientifically, that isn't actually been the correct, it's not the correct way of looking at things. The mind and brain are separate, but they work together. And I don't want to go into all the academic stuff of dualism and all that kind of thing, but essentially what we see is that if you think of your brain as a physical organ, and if you think of your body as as also part of the physical, your mind is like the energy that drives it. So your mind will change the brain. The brain is changed with the mind. The body's changed with the mind. Your heart beats because of your mind. So it's generating, the mind is a big term for the mental aspects of our humanity that drive our functioning. And so the work I've done over the past nearly 40 years now is looking at the mind-brain-body connection, which is psychoneurobiology, and looking at how your mind can't function without the brain and the body, and vice versa. So if someone dies, for example, everything disintegrates physically because the energy is gone. Once the heart stops beating, within 20 seconds, the brain's flatlined and the body's already in a state of disintegration. And so we know that there's a force of aliveness. And so that's an easy way to understand mind. So mind is this force of aliveness of how we perceive and do life and how we can experience life. And in the experiencing of life, there is a very messy aspect that's very much experimental. Like none of us, for example, you've got this conversation pretty, you've done questions, you've sent me through, you've prepared questions. There's a level of planning, but we don't quite know where it's going to go. So there's a level of messiness in the back and forth of our conversation. And that's very typical of our day-to-day lives. We have a certain plan, but then things happen and, life happens, you do things and it's a little bit different. So the messiness is the day-to-day experiencing of life that we are so good at as humans. We start the experience, we respond to the experience. Sometimes we don't respond so well, so we make a mess, and sometimes we respond well and then we don't make such a mess. And that messiness then is adjusted or not adjusted. If it's adjusted, then we solve the mess and we communicate better, or we do our job better, or we get that emotion under control, that reaction under control, or we fix up an answer that wasn't clear or something like that. If we don't manage the mess, we then can get overreactive. Maybe we get irritated, maybe we get snappy, maybe we get upset, maybe we walk away and we don't resolve it and it becomes another thing to just suppress and add to a bunch of stuff that's burning you out, and so on and so on. So that messiness refers to this messiness of life that we need to manage. So the implication then is that if there's this messy mind, is there another part of mind that is not messy? And yes, there is. We have what we call the non-conscious, N-O-N, not unconscious, non-conscious, N-O-N. And the non-conscious mind isn't a concept that is spoken about enough in our current sort of zeitgeist, because it's quite a sciencey term. People talk a lot about the unconscious and the subconscious. So in understanding messiness, let me quickly define the difference.
Please.
The non-conscious, N-O-N, is this huge 24/7 swirling mass of intelligence that makes up who we are. It is our unique identity. It's our ability to absorb our environment non-consciously, that we're not even aware. We're only aware of about 2% of what's going on, but we are absorbing pretty much 90 to 100% of what's going on around us. The non-conscious does this absorbing, literally absorbing of all these experiences, politics, sounds, interactions, all of the stuff, the stimulation, puts it in to goes into the non-conscious. The non-conscious also scans and finds what of that incoming data is good, accelerate that, grow that, tell us, send little messages through the subconscious, which is like a portal or a gateway or a waiting room into the conscious mind to say, hey, pay attention to that. That's something good to pay attention to. Or if it's toxic, you'll get a little, I feel uneasy, something's not quite right, and so on. So the non-conscious is constantly absorbing, evaluating, checking, got our back, and sending these messages through. It kind of narrows down. It's very fast. The unconscious operates 24/7, 400 billion actions per second and faster. The subconscious is a waiting room, so it's limited in how many actions per second it can manage, but it's about 1 million. And then our conscious mind operates at about 200,000. So there's a very narrowing focus, and it should be like that. All of this is good. It doesn't make one worse than the other. It's a team. And as a team, once something hits the conscious mind, that's when we're consciously aware now, being driven by our subconscious and our non-conscious, we consciously are taking in one word, forming one sentence, forming a phrase, a concept, and so on, and we're processing. But there's a lot more going on in the non-conscious than what we are consciously processing. And so it's this whole teamwork. So the cleaning up the mental mess is to learn to tune into what the non-conscious is telling us. So to tune into the signal, like when you have hovering anxiety. Why? When you have when you react to someone and someone gets mad at you and you have that reaction, why? What are you doing? And then to manage that. Otherwise it gets messy and then you wire that mess in because of neuroplasticity. So that's quite a long answer. I hope that answered, but you can dive in, ask me more, whatever you want.
Honestly, I might just quit my job because I had 3 follow-up questions and you addressed each one of them without me even having to ask. So you can tell you're a real pro. But so let me just kind of rephrase or make sure I understand, because one of the initial follow-up questions was, tell me about the difference between mind and brain. Then the follow-up was, okay, I understand mind. Is that conscious mind, subconscious mind, or both? And what I think I hear, conscious, subconscious, and non-conscious. Right? And that cleaning up the mess would include, but I want to ask this as well, would include non-conscious, and subconscious, right? I guess what I'm sort of curious about is, could it also be a conscious process? Because my head goes immediately to CBT, benefit finding, gratitude, ACT, like all the things that I don't think I would call non-conscious or subconscious, but I would call in the mind, and I would call mental clutter. Am I on the right page so far?
Yes and no. So
Okay.
yes, the question's excellent, and yes, you're getting it there. And it is quite complex to understand. But in order, something like CBT, ACT, or dialectical behavior, these are techniques, okay? And
Okay.
techniques are fantastic tools that we have, that we learn. And as you learn something, they go into the non-conscious. So in order to be able to utilize a CBT technique to help you manage, or meditation activity, a practice, or a breathing exercise, you first had to use your conscious mind
Right.
to receive the experience and process that. Then that would go, and at the same time, your non-conscious mind, your conscious is always, non-conscious never stops, okay? So your conscious mind absorbs, your non-conscious mind is there helping you absorb, and your conscious mind is making sense of this. And as you make sense of that CBT activity or that meditation practice through doing it, you then are putting that, like wiring it into the non-conscious mind, and also in the brain and the body, and that's neuroplasticity. And I did some of the
Right.
first on neuroplasticity in the world back in the late 80s, when they told us the brain couldn't change. And I said, no, the brain can change, because the mind is changing. So basically, every experience we have is absorbed through the mind and processed through the mind and built into the non-conscious. So the non-conscious and conscious grab it. And then as we consciously decide to pay attention, then we build that in as a solid little gravitational wave in the non-conscious, as a physical structural change in the brain, as a protein looks, your brain changes, that's neuroplasticity, and also as a change in every single cell of your body, which is a change right down to the level of what we call the microtubules in the cells. So we're constantly changing our mind to change our brain and our body structure. And when something takes root, then it will drive us. So the things that we remember to do, like you're in the midst of a stressful situation and you remember, hey, that was a great CBT technique of visualization, and I'm going to use it now because this person's going to drive me crazy. And if I don't quickly use this technique, I'm going to lose my cool and get messy. Your ability to do that is your conscious mind actually listening to the subconscious. And what the non-conscious did is that they read the room and said, okay, you need this technique, send it through the subconscious. And if you've tuned in to your non-conscious, you can actually recognize, okay, the technique I need now to deal with this toxic person is X technique. I'm going to do this X technique. And do you see what I'm saying? So it's a process of comes in, we focus, we build, and then that guides.
Is that process only in that sequencing or direction? Because what you described sounded like it might be sort of a symbiosis as opposed to some sort of linear relationship, right?
Yeah, it's definitely not.
Okay.
The non-conscious that doesn't follow the rules of present, past, and future. It's beyond space.
Yeah.
The conscious mind is very linear. The conscious mind is very linear because of its limited capacity. So that's why our ability to think and ask questions like this, you couldn't do it with just your conscious mind. So your ability to think the way you're thinking right now, what I'm saying, and ask the questions, that's your non-conscious mind working with your conscious mind to give you this level of intelligence that you can dig and explore and have deep discussions and debates, etc., etc. So yeah, it's not a linear, everything goes in, but your conscious mind is the thing that you choose to focus on. So if I choose to focus on building X, where that gets a little overridden is at trauma. Mm-hmm. So trauma is things that happen to us, and traumas come with a lot of salience. And because of that, they hit the non-conscious and become what we call automatized very fast. They kind of skip the process. They kind of skip and they become ingrained, and then they create tangled knots and whatever. So that's another whole interesting discussion around trauma.
So I want to go into neuroplasticity in a moment. Let me just get clear on this relationship between the conscious and non-conscious, and kind of the way that we can perhaps control it or relate to it in terms of the mental mess, right? So the mental mess is something that takes place, well, this is my first question. Does it take place just on the non-conscious level or on the conscious and non-conscious levels?
It's happening on both. So conscious, we get stuck in it. And in order to get out of the stuckness, the non-conscious is also, whatever's in the conscious is going to be in the non-conscious. Non-conscious has everything, but the non-conscious, it has the ability to say, hey, that is a mess. The conscious mind is in the mess and battles to always to see the mess. So, but you can train your conscious mind to listen to the non-conscious. And it's very easy once you know what to look for.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing it all the time, but we're not always aware and we don't always develop it sufficiently. So yeah, it's on both levels, but it's two different perspectives. The non-conscious is saying, hey, this is not great. This is going to disrupt something in your life. The conscious mind is stuck in it. And so we have to get the two working together to clean up the mess.
And you gave the example of like learning, for example, a cognitive behavioral therapy technique and kind of the non-conscious mind kind of serving that up, as it were. So can you train yourself to learn various techniques, for example, and then using your conscious mind to find the right one from your non-conscious mind? How does that relation work? And you gave the example of like this podcast interview, like we're thinking of various things and our non-conscious mind is serving up ideas and responses. My question is like, I'm imagining this non-conscious mind is kind of like a conveyor belt of options, like a kind of a baggage claim area at an airport, and you've got all the suitcases there and you can just consciously dive in and pick one out. Or is it a bit more randomized than that? Can you train it to be more controlled in that kind of way?
You're training your conscious mind to, because your non-conscious is super intelligent. You are, as humans, we brilliant. We just don't tap into our brilliance as much as what we should do. But you hear it coming through in sparks and things like these kinds of conversations show the brilliance of humanity because of the depth. Okay, so the baggage claim thing, it's a nice analogy, but it's actually more complex because the non-conscious mind is really brilliant. So therefore, when we what happens is that whatever's good for us, whatever and the non-conscious is on the search. So we as humans are always in survival mode. We are, and not just survival in terms of the tradition, that's maybe even the wrong word. It's a very intelligent form of growth, survival, not this, I've got to survive, I've got to live. It's how can I operate in an expanded consciousness of love and growing humanity and not just running away from the lion. That's very basic. Okay. It's a survival of how can I have the best conversation with you? How can I get this information in the most deep and loving way to help change humanity? That's the sort of thing that the unconscious mind's constantly looking for. So it's evaluative, it's wise, it's the wise part of us. And so therefore, as life is absorbed, when we're exposed to something that's good for us, the unconscious mind grabs that, but the conscious mind has to be reminded to deliberately build that in as a habit. And this is where a lot of my work that I've done has come in, the concept of habit formation. And habit formation, most people have a perception of what habit formation is. Habits are experiences that have become so automatized that they are very, and automatized not in terms of a robot or that automatic function of not thinking. They are so stabilized and so growth focused and so organic that they are driving you where you're not consciously thinking about them anymore, but they are consciously looking for the best way to make these changes in your life. So therefore, if I want to get a trauma issue under control, so let's say that you're dealing with grief and something happens and that can disrupt your functioning. Now that happens, it goes in, it builds into the non-conscious, and everything that's in the non-conscious is in the is going to be in your conscious mind, how you process it. It's going to go into your brain and your body. So it's in three places. There's a network. You're going to have a cluster, like a little cloud, if you want to think of it, of that trauma in your mind. It's a gravitational field and all that stuff. It's a little network of neurons and branches and dendrites, proteins, chemicals, that's all tangled up in your brain. And it's going to be little, like little tubes, like little hedges in a garden inside the cells of your body. And it's not going to be pretty because it's a trauma. And it's all connected. And each part of your body is a system. You've got the different systems of your body, and each system has a different perspective. Okay, so every experience we have has this mind version, this messy mind version, as well as the input. If you think of a cloud and then the sun hitting the cloud, that's the wisdom trying to get in. We have that then connected by an invisible string to the network in our brain, which is the neuroplasticity aspect. And then that is connected by these invisible strings to the different perspectives in our heart, et cetera, and gut and all those things. So every cell clusters together and we have these. It's hard to process, but it's embodied. That's why PTSD is the easiest to explain this, because when someone recalls an incident, could be from years ago, but the flashback is they re-experience that exactly as though it's happening in that moment. And that's what you have to break and change, otherwise you reinforce, and you just, whatever you think about the most grows stronger. So you have to break that revolving door and change it into an evolving process. Okay, so everything is in all of these networks. So in this conversation that we're having now, so this information is coming in, your words, my words, the electromagnetic light waves, everything, it's coming in through our conscious mind and non-conscious mind at the same time. It's all being absorbed. The non-conscious is quicker than the conscious, so it's driving this building process. The conscious mind is working in tandem, but slower. And this information is going into the brain synonymously. It's fast. It's not like there's a Melissa, it's very fast into the mind, into the brain, into the body. And as soon as this energy hits the brain and the body, genetic expression happens and proteins form. And so this is being built. As we're talking, we are wiring, and that's neuroplasticity. This conversation is wiring into our minds and the minds of the viewers and the listeners. And that's mind, brain, and body. So the levels of mind plus the physical. And if the more we talk, the more we think, and people go off and read the book and think about this more, whatever, the more you think about it, the more it grows. And habits come in that if something happens in your life that is so much part of you that you do it, we say automatically, but you're doing it and it just shows up. You turn around and say, oh, I'm doing that now, which I wasn't doing before. And what we see from the study of like changing a mindset, dealing with a trauma, building something in your life that you want to, a mindset change, something like that. I'm not talking about flossing teeth and going to the gym. Those are very simple things. I'm talking about life stuff, that, things that affect our mental processing and functioning. Those are going to take at least somewhere in the region of 63 days. 66 to 254. So 63 is kind of the 9-week mark that we see major changes happening in the network. We see this on using QEEGs. We see it in terms of behavioral aspects, and we see it in terms of biomarkers, body, various different biomarkers in the blood. Okay, that we can look at DNA, telomeres, etc., etc. So we can see specific changes happening, and when these specific changes happen, as it goes through this journey across 63 days, it gets to a point where the new this new thought pattern, the experience is becoming a thought pattern, has become so strong that it drives how you show up. So if we are showing up with a trauma response where, let's say, for example, grief, because I use that example, is keeping you stuck in flashbacks, and it's not, you're battling to have a decent relationship because and you feel burnt out and getting depressed, and life is just very difficult. You want that to change. You would, by working through a process of recognizing what is disrupting, what are the signals of disruption, not being able to keep a relationship, not being able to do your job properly, brain fog, feeling burnt out, all those, you look for all those, and then you track that back to the source, which is the experience, which is wired into this network, and you basically break that down, and then you rebuild it. Now, the trauma is never going away. It happened. What's happened is always there. What you can do is you can change what it looks like in that conscious, non-conscious brain, body, that whole cycle, that whole network, that can be changed. And the way you do is consciously working with the non-conscious over time. And that's a daily process. And then that rewires that network and therefore rewires the brain. So therefore that tangled mess eventually shrinks to this tiny, powerless little thing inside a cocoon, for want of an analogy, attached to this network. And what's replaced it is, this is the new way I'm going to function. But that is to do that, that's going to take at least 63 days. And if it's trauma, it's going to take multiple cycles. That's why we say up to 254 days and longer. So if I've worked with people with sexual traumas, for example, or terrible grief, it's not going to go away. It's going to take at least a couple of years before you've kind of got that under control. But each moment of each 63-day cycle, you start feeling different. But the key changes happen every more or less 9 weeks, because that's the time it takes to kind of fix that network, that complex protein, microtubule, clouds, energy, all this complex stuff doesn't just fix with a technique. So something like a meditation or a breathing or a CBT technique, those are brilliant to do, but they don't fix, they are part of what you do. So your meditation would be to prepare yourself, to get yourself into the right neurophysiological state, to do the work of processing. And something like a CBT technique would what you would do to actively reach yourself, to go forward, to be able to keep yourself moving.
Process.
Okay,
Yeah.
So it's a long answer. So unpack any of that you want.
Well, we should dive into neuroplasticity. Nick, did you have any follow-ups though on that?
Well, I think like maybe that's our opportunity, because the three of us are just throwing the term back and forth, but we should make sure like the audience knows exactly what we mean by neuroplasticity. But I think we can do it by coming back to the book, because it's such a perfect kind of metaphor. And when you said this tangled mess, what I keep hearing is, well, you're really using neuroplasticity, conscious, subconscious, non-conscious, symbiotically, to untangle said mess, to rewire, right, the brain in a pretty literal form. And so maybe I can just use that as a setup to say, well, you just kind of anchor us in what you mean by neuroplasticity and why it is so useful for this particular analogy.
Absolutely. So neuroplasticity is a word that's, as we all know, is really used a lot now. But back in the late 80s, it was a term that was very, very unknown. And it was only by the mid-90s that we started with MRI technology, started really seeing, hey, the brain actually doesn't stay static, it changes. I had a professor at university in the 80s who said the brain couldn't change, and that stimulated the research I did in neuroplasticity, working with people with traumatic brain injury. So they've got damaged brains and they weren't functional, and they went from being non-functional with mind work to getting degrees, and not just one. There were thousands of people that we reached. So basically, neuroplasticity is the ability that we have as humans to change our brain. That's what it is. So we change our brain with what? With our mind. What is our mind? It's our eunice. It's our aliveness. It's this ability that we're having now to converse, to appreciate a conversation, to love, to live, etc. That's mind, and all those different levels that we spoke about. So every moment you open your eyes in the morning and you start experiencing life through your mind. And at night when you sleep, you go unconscious. And in the unconscious state, the conscious and the subconscious, the conscious goes to sleep. The unconscious takes over the conscious, but the subconscious and the non-conscious are still firing. And what they're doing is sorting out what you've experienced during the day with regeneration, restoration, preparing you for the next day. So neuroplasticity is all of that. So from the moment you open your eyes, you're experiencing everything: conversation with partner, having breakfast, reading the email, going to the day. That's all experiences, reading what's going on in politics, watching a movie, whatever. All of those experiences are coming in through the mind into the brain and changing the brain. So our brain is constantly changing, but not only our brain, our body too. Whatever happens in the brain happens in the body. So our body is changing alongside, which is why we have 150 years of research showing that unmanaged stress causes problems in your heart and in your body and all that kind of stuff. And I've done some of that research too. And so and it's logical. We know you go through something, you have people that lose in grief, they have a heartbreak. It's physically damaging to your heart. Your blood pressure can shoot through the roof and cause a cardiovascular event. That's a very extreme reaction. But that is a very classic example of this relationship, in this plasticity relationship, in that our gut has as many neurons as the spinal cord. And that's why we talk about the mind being embodied, and it's not the brain running the show, it's the mind running the show and the brain and body responding. So plasticity is this ability of this constant change that we're in. Neuroplasticity is the term that we use for the changes that happen in the brain. Because we've been in a 50-year focus on the brain, we've had a very neurocentric approach. Neuroplasticity gets more attention than body plasticity. Although Bessie van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, and Candace Pert's work.
I was going to ask you about that. I wondered if you wanted to take a position. Somewhat controversial.
It is. And so Candace Pert actually was way before even Bessie van der Kolk, and now it's very trendy to talk about somatic work and that sort of thing, and it's real. It's very real. But Candace Pert was one of the first, her and her team, to show the immunological relationship. In other words, how what we're doing with our mind is affecting our body. I've shown in my research that in 9 weeks you can change the length of your telomeres, which was unheard of till recently, because telomeres are the ends of chromosomes, and the belief was that it took 5 years at least to change telomeres, and it was done through exercise and diet. I've shown with mind you can change it in 9 weeks, and so on. So, and there's a lot of other research down that road. So neuroplasticity is changing telomeres, changing how your heart functions. When your blood pressure changes because you worked up, when your gut changes, those are all plastic changes. That means every system of your body and your brain are always in a state of flux depending on what you're going through. And the neuro part is the change in the brain, and then the somatic part is the changes that happen in the body. So psychoneurobiology looks at the plasticity across the entire system, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Hi friends, Nick here with just a brief interlude to share with you an update on one of our newest partnerships with the Anti-Fragile Academy. Throughout John and I's conversations with many, if not most, of our guests, one thing has been made really clear. In order for people to flourish, thrive, experience the good life, they need to develop the capacity to not only navigate and endure, but ideally grow from the bad, grow from unpleasant experiences. That's why we're thrilled to be partnering with our newest sponsor, the Anti-Fragile Academy, an organization that I co-founded with Dr. Adam Wright, Director of Mental Performance for the Washington Nationals. At the Anti-Fragile Academy, we work with adolescent athletes, executives, and educators to help them understand some of the science, not just of optimal performance, but of well-being and anti-fragility. The ability not only to endure and bounce back from unpleasantness, but to actually come back stronger, to grow from it. Between Adam and I, we've worked with Fortune 100 companies, Inc. 300 executives, Division I programs, and elite professional athletes and Olympians from all over the world. To find out more about how you can leverage anti-fragility training, check out our website at theantifragileacademy.com.
Let's connect this then back to the 5 steps in cleaning up your mental mess, because you describe how these 5 steps build skills in directing our neuroplasticity. So could you outline each of these 5 steps and connect them with the key areas of the conversation so far?
Okay, so we started with the messiness and all that stuff. So essentially, we're always changing. That's key here. You're always in a neuroplastic state. The neuroplastic effect is always happening because you're always changing. You can't stop that. As a human, if you're alive, you are plastic and things are changing. The plastic paradox is that you're changing regardless of whether you control it or not. So if I have a suppressed issue or if I have a bad habit and I just keep doing it, I'm making it stronger because of neuroplasticity and because of plasticity. So the other side of the coin is I can stop that and I can redirect that. So the Neurocycle, which was developed 38 years ago, based on my research with traumatic brain injury, dementia, autism, neurological things, as well as trauma and emotional issues, was I first developed a theory, which is what scientists do, and then we test and we do research, and I'm still doing research. I never stopped. I just published another paper, just came out yesterday. So
Congrats.
Thank you. That's what we should be doing because you never know it all. A good scientist should keep on searching. Okay, so essentially, the Neurocycle was birthed 38 years ago in desperation from that lecture that I had from the neuroscience lecturer saying, listen, if someone's damaged their brain, if someone's got a trauma, if someone's got dementia, if someone's got a learning disability, all you have to do is teach them to compensate because the brain can't learn. I thought something's very wrong with this model. And that launched me into the career that I had. And that's unheard of now. People wouldn't say that anymore because of how we've advanced in science. But that was what was taught in that time frame, that you just taught people to compensate. So I developed the Neurocycle, which wasn't called the Neurocycle back then. It was a 5-step process and it had all kinds of fancy science names. Neurocycle is easy to just understand. So it's a term for, I developed a system. It's not a technique. You can use any technique in it. You can use meditation, your favorite breathing exercises, your favorite CBT, your favorite ACT, all the different beautiful therapy techniques that are out there. EMDR, I'm a big fan of that. IADC, there's so many phenomenal techniques. The problem with those techniques, all of them, is that if you use them outside of neuroplasticity, you're going to have very random changes. If you don't use them in an organized system, you're going to get change and you're going to get effect. It's just people feel that, but the effect is disorganized, so you don't get the full benefit from it. So therefore, people that will just go through like deep psychoanalysis, which is brilliant, but if you don't put it into the correct system, you'll go in circles forever and you have therapy for years and you just kind of seem to never, to progress, but it seems to be very slow. Things like EMDR, fantastic, but if you just follow research protocols and you don't really heal the trauma. You've got to use it within the right time frames, etc. So what I wanted to find was, I want to take all these amazing techniques that all these brilliant people are developing and create a vehicle, a system within which you can plug this, and that system needs to follow how do we drive neuroplasticity, and that's what the Neurocycle is. The Neurocycle is something that you can use to fix the worst things in your life, the traumas, which are what happened to you. So on a scale of 1 to 10, it's your 8, 9, 10. So trauma is what happens to you. Trauma's had a lot of concept creep. In other words, it's a word that's used. Someone drove in front of me, I had trauma. That's not trauma. Okay. Trauma is something that happened to you. That's just irritating. Someone driving in front of you. Okay. So 8, 9, 10 is trauma. Trauma happens to you. Let's look at the middle of the scale. So let's say from 4 to 7, those are bad habits. Those are habits that we've developed that have disrupted our life. Like just never dealing with getting irritated or feeling like, well, I'm the boss, so I can just act like this, or I'm never going to compliment someone because if I whatever, the habits that we develop, exercise, whatever. Then the 1, 2s, and 3s are the day-to-day struggles, the unaccepted, no one's walking around happy all day long. We're surviving. We have moments of happiness, but it's okay to not be okay. So most of everyone's daily life is kind of a grind with perks of happiness, maybe with a great lunch with a loved one, or you hear something great, or you have a great interview like this or something like that. But that day-to-day stuff, there's unexpected stuff that happens, like technology crashes, or this goes wrong, or that goes. Those day-to-day struggles also need to be managed, because if something happens in the moment and you let it throw you off your game, and you've got to now go into a lecture, a meeting, a podcast, help your kid with something, you're not going to be in a wise state. You're going to be caught in the mess, and you're not going to access the wisdom. So the Neurocycle is a system. It's a planned and guided system to help you make sure that change that is happening in the moment, when someone freaks you out and you get thrown off your game in that meeting, or whether a trauma is triggered, or whether a bad habit raises its head, you can use the Neurocycle to capture that and redirect the neuroplasticity. And so you then take charge and say, okay, I can either carry on getting irritated and building this toxic habit. I can either carry on being triggered and stay in this flashback, which is affecting how I'm functioning. I can get irritated with this toxic person in this moment, in this meeting, or I can direct neuroplasticity. I can do a quick Neurocycle in 1 minute in this meeting, keep a smile on my face, and still keep still run that meeting like I want to, not be thrown by that person's whatever. I can not be triggered by that. I can recognize that trigger of that trauma, and I can say, okay, I can't fix it now, I'm in a meeting, but I can deal with this tomorrow morning or tonight or whatever. Bad habit, you get my point. So the Neurocycle is a system within which you put whatever you need. So how I discovered the Neurocycle was working initially with traumatic brain injury. So here's someone who's got brain damage. They can't function. They can hardly talk, walk, whatever. I took the most extreme cases I could find and thought, well, where do I start? How do I start stimulating the mind-brain-body connection? So that's where it started. And what I found was that what we've got to first do, and I've taken such complex science and I've made it into 5 simple steps with a preparation. So, and this will make sense. I'm going to give you the easiest way to explain the 5 steps is, let me give you an analogy quickly, and then I'll tell you what the 5 steps are and demonstrate.
Great.
Yeah, sure.
So think of flying a plane, not necessarily being the pilot, but flying in a plane. They first have to prepare a plane that's in the hangar, that's, they get gas and fuel and do whatever they have to do engineering wise. It's prepared. That's the equivalent of things like meditation, breathing, visualization, calming, all those beautiful things that you need to do to get your physiology decompressed out of this chaotic state where you've got maybe too much cortisol flowing, or too much, not enough anandamide or whatever, and heart's beating too fast, blood pressures. You want to get that down to a state, but you don't want to get sleepy. You want to get to a state of focus. So in terms of brain language, we want to get enough gamma waves going with beta waves. In other words, we want to get a certain pattern of energy that you are calm, but you're focused. There's a time for being sleepy. And we also have in my app, I've got a Neurocycle app. I have also got programs that can decompress you and get you nice and calm and sleepy, but you're not going to do that if you're going to do the Neurocycle, because the Neurocycle, you're trying to fix something. You're trying to get that bad habit under control. You're trying to get that trigger under control, that deal with a toxic person at work, whatever. So then if you think of it, then the plane takes off. And that's a very specific process. Then the plane flies, and that's the majority of the thing is flying. You take off and then you fly to your destination, which is the longest part of the journey, and then you land. That's what a Neurocycle is. It's preparing, it's taking off, flying, and landing, with the flying being the longest process. So the first step, the preparation, is breathing, meditation. I give lots of exercises for that in the book and in the app. Then the taking off is called gather awareness. And the reason I chose words like gather is It gives you control. One of the massive problems in mental health intervention currently that's actually made mental health worse over the past 40 years is this feeling of, if you have any kind of emotion that's not considered good, there's something wrong with you and you need to be diagnosed by a professional, and it's an illness that you don't have control over. And that is not science. It's been disproved. I see you smiling, and it's actually
we're chuckling because literally, Caroline, nothing has come up more in our almost 60 episodes with world-renowned experts than what you just said.
Oh, good.
We hear this time and time again. You said a little bit about what we do, but I'm currently kind of diving hard into the very limited science on anti-fragility. I want to ask you about post-traumatic growth. So like all of these ideas are something that we've heard time and time again. And I think we're glad to hear again, because it seems to be a lot of real thoughtful people are trying to point the same direction. And it just happens to be that most people are not headed in that direction. It's like unpleasant means bad in a lot of people's worlds, right? So anyway, sorry to cut you off, but we're very much on the same page.
I'm very glad and I found, because I have a podcast as well called Cleaning Up the Mental Mess, and it's the same. I have found from when I started to now, there's a shift. And there's still the biomedical model. It's still out there. There's still the psychiatrists and psychologists that are plugging diagnosis with the implication that there's a brain disorder causing it. It's not the brain disorder that's causing a serotonin imbalance and that's causing depression. That is not what's happening. What's happening here, depression is a very normal emotional warning signal that is a response to what you're going through. So it's not, you're showing up in a certain way because of. So the biomedical model doesn't look at that. The biomedical model, which is what you're saying most of the people you interview disagree with, thank God. Let me tell you, a little while ago, it wasn't like that. It's been such a dominant model, but that model is basically saying, oh, that's a symptom because you have a lack of serotonin or something wrong with one of the sort of 4 pillars that they talk about. And if you put some antidepressants in, it's going to fix it. It's the worst thing we've done. And if we track the federal data from 96 to 2014, and then there's been more studies since, that philosophy has increased the people dying 15 to 25 years younger than they should from preventable lifestyle diseases. So when you give a diagnosis and a drug, the mindset changes, the energy through the body therefore changes, your vulnerability to disease increases, and you add those psychotropics, which are not meant to be used chronically, only acutely, which means short, not long term. They then create other iatrogenic changes. And so now we not only have the life issue that's not being addressed, but we have a diagnosis that's now added damage to fuel to the fire. Now I think there's something wrong with me on top of having gone through whatever. And I have a drug that's now messing it up more. So 3 things. Are we surprised that people are dying 15 to 25 years younger? The current biomedical model is a disaster. And so this is what I've been trying to come against and show the proof of. So my philosophy is I'm not going to fight them. I'm going to do from ground level up. I'm going to teach people how to empower yourself. And I'm not saying don't go to a psychiatrist, don't take the medication, but be very aware of what it does. Recognize it's a drug, not a medicine. It's not fixing, it's actually just helping you get through the moment. And with that knowledge in mind, then you can take control of your own healing. But the key that I have shown, and so many of my colleagues and so many people in the field, is that for a person to start developing mental fitness, you have to feel empowered to be able to manage your own life, because you can't be reliant on the external forever. You can't be reliant on the drug to fix you, the therapist to fix you, the psychiatrist to fix you. You have to know that they're supportive, but you are the one that wakes up at 3 a.m. with a panic attack. You are the one sitting with that hovering anxiety or that undercurrent of, I can't do this. And how do I do that? And that's where what I've tried to work on is give people a system. This is how you can recognize when you're in that state, and then you can drive it. And that's what the Neurocycle is doing. But it's very specific. If we're going to drive a change that is sustainable, you have to follow what neuroplasticity, the directives of neuroplasticity. So that's the flying of the plane. The first step, gather awareness, where you're gathering awareness of your 4 signals. The second and third and fourth step are very simple: reflect, recheck, and recheck, reflect, write, and recheck. And then the 5th step is to an active reach, to land the plane. When you gather awareness, you are gathering awareness of what your 4 signals are, how you're showing up. We have 4 signals all of us. Everything can be put under these 4 signals, and they work as a team. The 4 signals are your emotions. Okay, so the first thing is your emotions. They're not diseases. They're not symptoms of a disease. They're beautiful things that help us experience life.
Data.
Guilt, data. Guilt is as important as joy. Why? Because guilt, data, as you said. Emotions never live alone. They are somewhere in the body. So we need to check our physical or bodily sensation. So if you're feeling guilt, there's a chance you'll have some sort of gut wrenching or whatever. I don't know. It's different for every person. There's no rule of how it works by an individual. If you have emotions, work with bodily sensations and work with your behaviors. So if I've got emotions and I've got a reaction in my body, I'm going to say and do things in a certain way so I can look at my behaviors. That all produces a perspective. So let's say depression is the emotion. Let's say that gut ache is the bodily sensation. Let's say that anger is getting angry outbursts are the behavior. And let's say perspective, life sucks. Okay, so I literally create 4 sentences where I ask myself, I don't try and go in circles all over the place, very sequenced. Your neuroplasticity is driven by order. So you follow a very specific order, and also time limit. You don't do this for hours on end. Otherwise, you'll just talk yourself into a black hole. And it'll be the revolving door instead of the evolving door. Okay. Then from there, now you've taken off. Now, if you just stop there, like if a pilot doesn't know how to fly a plane and only take off, they're going to crash. So we see that so often. People are good at meditating, bringing up the thought, but they crash because they don't know what to do with what they've thought of. So then they suppress it. So then it gets worse. That's what we're seeing. There's a lot of research evidence coming out, pouring out, showing that meditation alone is dangerous. Okay. Mindfulness alone is dangerous. We have to go beyond. Okay. So we create mindfulness, then we take off. People are good at also naming their emotions and their body. We're good at that.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I really want to double click super quickly on what you just said, because we see these studies coming out more and more, right? Anyone who confirmation bias, disconfirmation bias, they'll throw that in your face. Oh, it's all woo. It's, this stuff doesn't work. Told you so. That's not what you're saying. What you're saying is the mindfulness and the meditation, you correct me if I'm wrong, works well in that it brings up or it unearths or makes us more aware, Rick Hanson's term, spotlighting, right? These things. But if those things are unpleasant and you don't then have the techniques and the remaining steps, you've unearthed something that you then feel very viscerally and cannot deal with. You've made your problem worse.
It makes the problem worse. And that's why even like the EMDR will also bring it up. And if you don't land the plane, people crash, and people are crashing all the way along, because most things are, people will meditate, people will prepare the plane and take off, but then people want to just land. If you don't do the flying, you're going to not have sustainable change. And that's what's key. And that's what we can do. And that's what the Neurocycle is trying to help people do. So when you've taken off the reflect, that is very specific to, okay, I've gathered awareness of these signals. Neuroscientifically, you've actually shone the spotlight on that actual neural network that is containing data. And therefore, you've pulled up the networks in the body. And therefore, you've pulled up the network in the mind. You've made a connection, beautiful connection. There's a whole different game happening here at that point. But if you don't do something with that, you will crash badly. And that's why we need to go to step 2, which is, okay, I've got these networks very objectively, very kindly, and I explain all this in the app and whatever, and the book, that you need to say, okay, why do I think, almost like you're a therapist talking to yourself. I often tell people to put chairs together if you're doing something that's traumatic, and you kind of move from chair to chair, where you're in this mode and then you're in that mode. And so it's why do I think I have these emotions? What are the emotions? Why? And don't you just why do I have it in this body? Why do I feel it in my body? Why am I depressed? Why am I feeling it in my gut? Why am I reacting angrily and having angry outbursts? Why do I think life sucks? You don't have to solve it all. Just start the why process. Then immediately you go to a Mindstorm writing process. So step 3 is called write, but it's mentally writing and it's physically writing, where you take, because you can write, as you do step 1, you can write stuff down. And as you do step 2, you can write stuff down, or you can just do those 2 mentally and then step 3, write it down. So there's 2 ways of doing it. And each time you do it, it's going to be different. Whatever you do, you just go with the flow. As long as you do the 3 steps. The 3rd step is a Mindstorm, and that is so critical, because what I've done with step 1 and step 2 is I have basically enabled you to listen to the subconscious, which is a bridge, like a waiting room in a doctor's office for a visual. You're waiting, and if you think, and then if you the people that are the most critical are the ones that are getting pulled through to the back first. I don't want to trigger people with a hospital analogy, but that is a very good analogy to try and help you understand. So in other words, I have created with this so far, with you helping you do the gather awareness and the reflect and step, is I have helped you to actually look in the waiting room and see what's waiting there for me, what's the most urgent thing. And you've also started tapping into the non-conscious, not just the messiness, but the wisdom of the non-conscious. This is not woo-woo. This is hardcore gravitational fields, quantum physics, electromagnetics. We see a different functioning in people. You see things differently. It's unreal. When I work with patients and I have facilitators that are trained, I have people that have never met me, who've just done my app, and we have thousands upon thousands, not just one, probably close to 100,000 plus testimonies of people saying, and I hate the word testimony, people sharing stories of how when they force themselves to do these steps, when they hit that step 3, the world opens up because things just blast you. I'm not talking journaling. I am talking Mindstorm. Things are going to pop up from the unconscious that seem unrelated, that may shock you, may whatever. And you just capture it all. You just write it on. And I recommend people take a big piece of paper, in the middle, write a circle, and then move non-linear, because you then tap into that non-linear nature of the non-conscious mind. You don't keep yourself stuck in monochromatic one word, lines. You create a space of dimension. You can even cut a circle if you're battling of a page, make a big page a circle and do a circle, and then that takes you out of that linear dimension. And just write what comes up. You could have a line coming out, drawing in the middle. You can write the name of your thought that you're working on. Maybe it's low self-esteem. Generally, when we start, it's very broad. As you move through the 63 days, it becomes much more specific. But day one, it may just be low self-esteem or people pleaser. And then you could have a little line, emotions, depression, or whatever, the example that I gave. And then from there, just whatever comes up, put it wherever you want on the page, on lines, in bubbles, whatever. Then, and you limit the time. I'm talking, honestly, 3 minutes literally for each of these for the first 3 weeks. After that, you just do it in a minute. Then the 4th step, and I'm still flying. This is processing. A lot of stuff's come up. If you feel anxious, I have decompression activities. If you feel anxious, this is where you can breathe, do a little meditation, because when stuff comes up, it can trigger you, but don't stop there. Just go on to the next step. Don't push it if it's starting to make you active. Breathe. Just breathe deeply. I've got it. As I said, there are exercises in the app and the book to help you if you need to decompress in the moment. And then step 4 is now where step 1, 2, and 3 are activating, getting deep. Now what we do is we kind of move you forward. So there's this digging up. Now we're going to do a bit of reconstruction. So now you look at everything and you see patterns, triggers. The guiding question here is, this has happened. What can I do about it? How can I look at this differently? What can I do right now to cope? I'm not trying to solve this whole problem, but I see that this low self-esteem has come from something in childhood. I don't know what, but there's something popping through, or it's come from constant barrage of negativity in marriage or something, whatever. I'm not quite ready to deal with it. That's fine. But what can I do today that is going to help me? So you kind of like make some sense of what you've written, and you may not make all of the sense, and that's fine. You've got tomorrow. And then you land the plane. So, okay, that's enough. Land the plane, and that's an action. It's an action that helps you actively reach towards building the new way of functioning, because you're never getting rid of, but you're changing, you're rewiring. So by doing a little active reach, it's a simple statement. It could be something as simple as, and you write it down. In the app, there's a little place where you can write your active reach, and then you can set it to pop up 7 times a day, like your notes pop up. You know how you can set reminders to pop up on your phone. That is to keep you anchored in moving forward. Because when you do this kind of work, the temptation is to ruminate and to let the intrusive thought, which is actually your new best friend, drag you back down. So the active reach keeps you moving forward for the day, because you've got to get through the day. So you then, every time you find yourself wanting to go back to that trigger or go back to that place, you say, no, I'll do that tomorrow. And you say your active reach, which could be something as simple as, I'm working on my self-esteem, not quite sure what's going on yet, but I'm working on it and it's a good job. Simple statement like that. You could add a visualization. You could add an affirmation. You could do a quote. You could do a little CBT technique, like visualizing, putting it in a box and locking the key. And so anything, that's where you do the little action that helps you forward today. It's not that you're suppressing. It's that that's enough work for today. That's great. That's progress. We'll pick it up tomorrow. And slowly build many little habits each day cumulatively. 2 phases. The first 21 days, it takes you around 15 to 22 minutes a day. That's kind of your sweet spot. So you're spending about 3 minutes per each of the 5 steps, including your meditation. You can go longer, but I never recommend longer than 45 minutes. Never. It's too tiring. You're not going to benefit. Keep it around 15, 20, 45 max. And then from day 22 through 63, first 21 days, you've deconstructed and reconstructed. You've got this new way, this new rebuilt, rewired, neuroplastically rewired neural bundle in your brain, pretty new cloud. It's not so dark and cloudy anymore. And the cells in your body, this memory is now in a healthier version. It's cleaned up. But it's tiny. And it's got to compete with all the other things going on in your life. So you're going to know that you've reached a change, but it's still not strong enough. It's still not showing up. So to make something show up, that's when you've got to practice it daily. So you go through the same 5 steps, 1 minute per step, 5 minutes a day, where you go through the same 5 steps, but it's constructive, it's building, it's little exercises that you do, and it's very guided in the app on what you do. And that's basically watering the plant. It's growing the tree, it's making it bigger and bigger. It's growing, it's making that neural network from being very vulnerable to strong and solid. So that one day you turn around and you say, oh my gosh, I'm not reacting to that person. Or I don't feel like I'm not people pleasing. I just didn't people please. And it's almost like, wow, that transition has happened. On the way, ups and downs, but that's another whole story.
Oh, thank you so much for that extremely thorough explanation.
Yeah, there's so much good stuff here. There's about a half a dozen questions I want to ask, right? But we also want to be respectful of your time, and we're coming up towards the end. Now, generally, what we would do here is ask you our flourishing question, which is like, what's the one thing, right? But you have done such a good job of, I think, kind of leading this there already, which is, if we, I think, even want to stand a chance of flourishing, ideally we can clean up our mental mess. How do we clean up our mental mess? We need to practice neurocycling, these 5 steps, get them to a point where they're pretty much automatic, right? They can happen really quickly and without much conscious effort, or maybe any conscious effort. As you're explaining it, I couldn't help but keep thinking, oh, what about this other potential first step, especially when you were talking about depression, which is, what if somebody has learned helplessness? In other words, what if somebody doesn't have agency? And I wonder, as we start to wrap here, if that's a question you've sort of addressed, and if you could maybe speak to that. Like, presumably anyone listening to this, they have some agency because they've already said, I'm going to listen to, a show on flourishing and science and behavior change. So maybe they're wondering, or maybe they want to try to help someone in their lives who just doesn't think they can change, doesn't think they can do this, doesn't even want to start trying. Do you have anything for them?
I'm so glad you asked that question. It's such an important question, because that's one of the things, as you say, with learned helplessness, is you feel like you have no empowerment. So me telling you, hey, you are, the greatest gift that we have as humans is free will. But when someone is so depressed, they feel like they don't even have free will. And I've had patients saying to me, I can't even make a choice. I don't even know how to make a choice. And that's why we need support. And that's really, when people are at that stage, they're in the extreme stage where they need to be helped to help themselves. But at the same time, I want to say very clearly, you can walk alongside someone, you can help someone, but you cannot make the choice for them. So what we need to help a person recognize with learned helplessness is that they've learned, the key word is they've learned the helplessness, so they become a habit. So it's going to take 63 days. So what I would do with those situations is I'd work with the family. I'd make sure that I had not just the person, but I had a family member or a friend or someone that I know that would walk with them for 63 days. And then I would literally say, can you do the app with them daily for 63 days? Even if it's over the phone, on FaceTime, on Zoom, or physically next to each other, just can you give for 21 days, can you give 15 minutes to sit with this person? And can you give 5 minutes for the balance of the 63? Generally, by around about day 14, they don't need as much support. By day 21, they kind of want to do it on their own. And once they're in the second phase, which is 22 through 63, not all, but most people that are in that state of deep depression and learned helplessness are starting to actually say, okay, I think I can do today alone and I'll feed back to you. Or I need you to help me today. So they're starting to take control. The big thing is with learned helplessness is that you cannot throw a bunch of techniques. You cannot tell them a bunch of platitudes. You cannot say you'll get through this, and all the things that we say that just make them more frustrated. Is we have to say, I get you. You're stuck. I'm here to walk you through. Let's do this. Tell me. And you literally ask them those questions. You literally walk through those 5 steps and you say, you just answer me. And if you can't answer, I'll suggest some phrases. And so you rewire. And once the rewiring starts shifting, that's when the self-empowerment comes back. And then from there, it's a slow kind of, walk through.
Yeah, makes sense.
You can take from there.
Efficacy, all that. Yeah, makes good sense. Yeah, thank you. Perfect.
Amazing, Caroline. Thank you so much. So you've mentioned a bunch of things that we'll add to the show notes, your app, the Neurocycle app, your podcast, your books, and so on. Is there anything else you'd like to mention to our listeners before we wrap today?
I think that's everything. And there's obviously social media. We try to give people really good help and tips on social media, the basics and things. So you'll find it all there. So yeah, the book, the app, I'd really recommend the app, because the app is, and the book, obviously, but if not everyone will read the book. If not everyone reads, unfortunately, we should read.
Sure.
Ideal is to have a book and the app, because you're going to get 2 different perspectives, as we know. But if you just need to get going and get some help, dive into the app.
That's the Neurocycle app, right?
It's available on iTunes, Google Play, and there's a web version.
All right, cool.
Oh, great.
We'll share that.
Good.
We'll add that to the show notes. So thank you so much, Dr. Caroline Leaf. This has been How to Clean Up Your Mental Mess and Flourish with Dr. Caroline Leaf. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching this latest episode of Flourish FM.
Thanks so much for listening to Flourish FM. We hope you enjoyed the content. Please be sure to leave us a 5-star review and hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to your podcast and on all major social media platforms.
And if you visit our website, flourishfmpodcast.com, you can sign up to our newsletter. We send out a weekly newsletter. First newsletter of every month, we share a long form blog, and every newsletter, every week, we share highlights from our previous episodes. Please hit subscribe on our website.